Hey, Magic Weaver. Welcome back to the Weaving Magick Podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Lilly, and today we're going to be getting into an interesting topic. And we've also been long overdue for a solo cast where I can just hang out with you. And I want to dive into a piece of magic and spirituality that has been very fascinating to me about degendering your mind and looking at masculine and feminine energy in a new lens that's not trapped in the gender binary. So without further ado, actually, you know what? I have one more thing to say before we get into it. If you are triggered by this episode, I would love it if you could take a moment to pause and think about where that trigger is coming from and just reflect on it. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as you sit and digest and think about the ramblings and curiosities of this non-binary witch as I explore spirituality through a lens that is not in the gender binary. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Today, this podcast, I'm really excited to get into something I've been thinking about a lot and having a lot of conversations about. And it's all about degendering your mind. And this is such a big concept because we don't realize how subconscious and layered the gender binary is into everyday life, and especially for cisgender people. And as coming out and having family and people who may not understand, you have moments where they just don't get it because they've never had to think about it. The gender binary has served them. They identify with their sign sex at birth and they found where they fit. And that's great. I am glad that is your experience. That is not everyone's experience. That's the beauty of being human. We're expansive. And when we talk about degendering the mind, a lot of it comes to language. And it's interesting because when we talk about, as in particular, gender neutral languaging, we have one of the biggest rebuttals that I hear from people is it's so limiting to do that. When in reality, it's expansive. We're saying that you should be intentional with your language to be inclusive until you know how the people around you want to be identified as and want you to call them to have consent. And that's a whole topic for another day. Consent is not talked about enough. It's definitely gotten better, but we could do even better. We should be having consent. A couple things that I do for that, just a small little sidebar here. I ask people, if we're in a conversation and I've had a really rough time, I will ask my friends, even my closest friends, do you have space for me to unload and vent right now? And if they say no, that's okay. If they say yes, that's okay. Or even communicating, hey, I need to vent right now, but I don't need you to tell me how to fix it. I just need you to listen. Or I need to vent right now, and I would really love your help brainstorming ways to come up with solutions. So really, consent and boundaries, they're big things. And the way that we address people is something that we need consent for. And for some reason, it is so triggering to people because it breaks this norm narrative that people have written for themselves. And I don't know if I feel like people have this idea that gender neutral languaging is taking away from their identity because they do fall in the gender binary. But we're not taking away from anybody's identity. We're being inclusive and expanding how people can choose to express themselves, whether that is the gender binary or not. So let's break down some instances, layers. This has been coming up for me a lot because I, as a gender nonconforming person, I find that I do it all the time. And you do it at such a subconscious level that you don't realize it until you're intentionally becoming aware of it. So, one of the big ones that I hear is gendered terms used to address a collective group of people. Hey, girls. Hey, guys. Hey, dude. And I understand. And I personally am like, yeah, whatever, because I'm just tired of fighting people. But we should understand the power that our languaging holds when we do that. Why is our default gendered? And how are we limiting ourselves when we do that? And what is the impact we're having on other people? Because regardless or not of our intentions, we are responsible for the power our language holds. Our language literally weaves magic and intent in this world in every conversation. And it's important that we start to have this shift to a more gender neutral approach, especially to collective conversations like that, because you don't know the experiences of everybody else in that room, and nor do you really have a right to speak to it until you have built that relationship with every single person and had consent. So, another thing I hear when I talk about this, what do we call people? When you go into customer service, ma'am, sir, well, what do we say when we want to be respectful to people and they don't fall in those two? Well, hey, friend, hey, folks, or how can I help you? Don't even need to the sir or ma'am. You're not being disrespectful. You're not being rude. You're still performing your duties in customer service. There's many ways you can be neutral in the way that you approach someone, especially people you don't know until you know. Or you can open if it's somebody that you're wanting to engage and have a conversation with. If you're in a type of customer service where you're building relationships, ask or introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Alyssa. I work here and do XYZ. My pronouns are they, them. Nice to meet you. How can I help you today? And then that opens the invitation for them to also introduce themselves and give their pronouns. There's lots of ways. You can even ask, do you have a way that you would like for me to address you with respect? Why is that such a weird question to ask people? I'm working right now, okay? I'll come play with you in just a minute, okay? Bye-bye. Side note, if you ever wonder why my podcast can be a little scattered sometimes, it's because I have two little ones. If you've not been following me, surprise. If you've been following me, you know this. And they love to, I have French doors over here to my left, and they love to just look in the windows and they just want a hug and a kiss. And I take that pause and I always give that to them. But then I have to remember what the heck I was talking about. I know we were talking about degendering the mind and gender neutral language. And it's really not a difficult transition, except for you had to put effort into it. Become aware. And I think one of the resistances that I see is the all or nothing mentality of I have to be perfect at getting this languaging right 100% of the time, or I'm a failure. And this weird equating your worth with your perfection and your worth with your ability to produce. And I have a whole episode on productivity and worth, but they're not together. And the point is that you're trying. Newsflash, you're going to fuck up. I fuck up all the time. And it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You hold power in the language and the way that you speak. And you taking that moment to acknowledge, okay, I messed up. Let me pivot. An example of that. Hey, girl. You know what? Let me rephrase that. Hey, friend, how are you doing? How would you like me to address you? You know, it's okay to pivot. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake and correct yourself in the same sentence. It's the same thing we do, or at least I do with my clients when we're working on sorries, because you get stuck in that spiral all the time. Stop saying sorry. You don't need to be sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. And it's like, okay, in this moment, how can we pivot your languaging? So I find during the day sometimes, I'm going to use a funny example. I'm in bed with my partner and I let one rip. Oh, sorry. Why am I apologizing for a natural thing that my body needs to do and pass gas? So, what are different ways I could do that? We could have a fun Dutch oven situation and make it a fun experience. I could say something like, hey, you might want to go in the other room. I really need to pass gas, but I'm feeling so much better now. I don't need to apologize for the way my body functions. Maybe if it's a silent and deadly one, I can give them a warning. Maybe it's not something you need to apologize for. I'm being silly, but you get the point. And when this is just the top layer of degendering your mind, and we're going to get into masculine and feminine energy too. I'm saving that for last to wrap up this conversation. Let's think about other ways that we gender our languaging other than just the collective when we're talking to a group of people or identifying somebody in a professional setting. Oh, there are so many. A good example that I have heard a lot, especially because I was in ROTC and I almost joined the military. Girl push-up versus guy push-up. What? Why are those gendered? I have seen many women who can do regular push-ups. I've seen many men who can do regular push-ups. I've seen gender nonconforming people who can do push-ups. So why is that a gendered term? And a lot of the way that language is gendered, of course, is in the binary. So a lot of how I say this is going to be in the binary. It puts women in this lens of weak and fragile and cowardly and all of these negative things. And then it promotes the toxic masculinity. Have you seen the Barbie movie? Yes, there's problems with it. I get it, but patriarchy is terrible and it's subconsciously ingrained. And I feel like it highlighted that really well. But so we have a society that is highlighting and putting on a pedestal toxic masculinity and then degrading femininity. I can think of some other terms. You're a pussy. That's a big one. And a way of being derogatory. Now, people don't just say that to women identifying people or people who have. It's so weird to say this on a podcast. Am I going to get flagged for this? Those who have vagines. People say that as a general term to say that you're a coward or you're not worthy. And it's so fascinating. But if you are a courageous badass, you got balls. I'm sorry, not sorry, but balls are the most fragile things that exist. You barely touch them and they bring AMABs to tears. So why are we using that to define courage? Honestly, why are we using genitals to describe people's worth on a whole different layer? And it just, when you sit and think about it, it really doesn't make sense. And we have to get out of this mentality, well, that's just the way language is. This is just the way it's always been. We hear that a lot with non-binary people with they, them. They, them is not a plural thing. It's grammatically incorrect. One, language has constantly evolved over time. You can see where we started in Old English and where we are today. You literally can't even understand Old English. We as humans and our language is powerful and we have the ability to expand and change and mold to be better. And they, them is also used in the singular all the time. When you don't know who the person is, there's that. I've also had a friend who told me that when people struggle with it, to put you tell them to pretend you have a mouse in your pocket so they can refer to you and your mouse. And now I really want to make a little mouse and just pin it on me all the time. Like, hey, get it, get it, get it. Anyways, I digress. All of that to say, we really need to take a moment and pause and be intentional in the way that we speak and understand the power and root in what we're saying has. It has so much power. And we get to detangle and ungender our minds so that we can see and allow people to express their radiance, however that looks like for them. And it's truly liberating and freeing and exhilarating if you just give it a chance. You also may discover things about you never knew because you never given yourself the opportunity to experience them. And there's this rhetoric going around right now that trans is a contagious thing, or the LGBTQ community in general is a contagious thing. It depends on what political agenda they're deciding to run with that year, whether it's the gays or the trans or whoever is being attacked. It's not contagious. People are getting to a point, and there's two parts to this, where they either feeling safe to express themselves, or they're to a point where that's their only option and they're being brave. And both are brave, but there are different places of being, whether you're coming out from a state of being safe or you're coming out from a state of, I can't hold it anymore and I have to do this because the alternative is not something that I want. So it's not that it's contagious. We've created this beautiful LGBTQIA plus community so that people know that we exist. And it's okay to exist. And your existence is radiant and amazing, and however that looks for you. And it gives people the bravery and the freedom to come out. It's not a contagious thing. Gender queer, gender nonconforming people have been around for ages. And so I want to pivot back. So I know that I'm going back and forth here a little bit, but coming back to your languaging. There are so many ways that we speak that are gendered. And a reminder that pivoting your language is okay. Being imperfect is okay. Holding yourself accountable is something that needs to happen. And I think it's good to even ask people to support you. Hey, if you notice I'm doing this, please call me out on it. That doesn't make it their responsibility to do it, but it helps with the accountability of how you're pivoting your language. So when you say something like you hit like a girl and it just spills out of your mouth before you even have time to think, because again, this is a very deeply ingrained thing. Pause, acknowledge, oh shit, where the fuck did that come from? What is the messaging that I am portraying when I say this? That girls are weak. That's not okay, and I don't agree with that statement. So how can I say this better? How can I be more intentional with my words? Again, I think that was probably not the greatest example, but we're just going to run with it today. So let's get into the big part of this topic. And I know, as most of the topics I bring up, this is going to get me a lot of hate, particularly in the spiritual community. It's going to rub people the wrong way. And it means that it's good. It's triggering you. It's something that you need to reflect on if this is something that triggers you. But something that is heavily gendered that shouldn't be is masculine and feminine energy. Why is the energy in which we operate gendered into these two boxes? And in a lot of ways, when I dove into this spiritual concept, there were many ways that I struggled and there were many ways that it helped me. So I'm not minimizing the way that you're analyzing your energetic shifts and how to balance them. But I want you to reflect on how we're looking at it and how we can detangle the root and see the energy for what it is, because that energy isn't gendered. And when you have it gendered like masculine and feminine, I hear all the time, that doesn't mean men have masculine and feminine energy and women have masculine and feminine. Everybody has masculine and feminine energy, but you still are correlating masculine energy with men and what men do, and femininity with more of what women do. And it's so limiting. And it also creates this disconnect. Like a big thing in the spiritual community, especially I work in cyclical embodiment. So we talk about the phrase that they would use is womb work, but I like to call it sacral and root work, which is more in the chakra system. This energy isn't gendered, and we split it off in these two boxes. And in the spiritual community, it swings, that's what I was saying, it swings into the heavy feminine side. There are so many fucking resources on how to enhance your feminine energy, how to tap into your feminine energy, how to reach your dark feminine era. But where do you see how to balance your masculine energy? Where are those workshops at? I'm sure there are some that exist, but not to the extent that the feminine is right now. And it's put this separation that was already there between men and women, and it's like pushing it further apart. And even when you're reflecting on your own being, you're looking at it in these boxes, and I have to swing towards one box or the other. And we talk about balancing, and it's okay, I'm going to be 50% in this box and 50% in that box. And we forget to look at ourselves as a whole being. How do these energies flow through us as an entire being? And what is some other languaging we can use to help us understand this energy and use it in a way that we can break down this barrier of masculine and feminine and binary boxes? I like personally yin and yang energy. Even the symbol itself is just so beautiful because you're picturing a whole. But I think even then it's a little problematic because it's not from my culture, and it's not 50-50. And so when we say masculine energy, we're saying activated energy, get shit done energy. We're saying structure, right? And for feminine, we're saying we want more flow and dance and sensuality and sexuality. But if you listen to those words on both sides of the spectrum of quote unquote masculine and feminine energy, I have seen femininity or feminine energy get shit done. Just like I've seen masculine. Is it a little bit different? Sure. But how are they working together to make that happen instead of splitting it and breaking it out into one or the other? You know what I mean? And so I think when we understand the way energy works within ourselves, we need to understand what that balance looks like in a way that our soul just is ignited and feels more at home. So if you need the boxes, start with taking masculine and feminine out. Again, yin and yang. Yang being more of the activating energy, yin being more of your rest and flow energy. And play with how those two work with inside of yourself. And notice the differences that pop up when you look at it from that perspective. When I started doing this, I noticed so many things. I don't know, you just notice the lens of gender that you look at the world and you're like, why is this even here? And it's really hard to put words to. I'm creating this podcast and I'm trying to put this in words for you. And it's just a hard concept to explain. And for people who have a lot of wounds, it's like the energy, people trying to understand the energy are trying to put it into boxes. And it's actually limited our understanding of energy rather than truly helping us expand it, because we've literally split ourselves up into these two parts instead of bringing it together and understanding how the energy works inside of ourselves to reach the best state of being that we can, that feels good to us, and understanding it's going to look different on everyone. I'm rambling and talking in circles just a little bit, but I felt like it was something important to talk about and just to get your mind wondering. What would masculine and feminine energy look like within you if you didn't correlate it to man, woman, masculine, feminine boxes? If you could be an expansive being and just look at your energy for what it is. I really love Ayurvedic concepts for this reason, because you literally have Kapha, Pitta, Vata energy, which is earth, fire, air, and there's water in there too. But those are the three main ones. And it's all about understanding Kapha, that earth, that grounding is so needed. We're made up of all three of these energies or elements, or all four of these elements. But understanding when that earth is out of balance, you're going to feel heavy. Your digestion is going to be slow. You're going to be lethargic. You may find that you're having a little bit more lazy. And to balance that, you need to bring in the fire. You need to bring in the pitta. You need to help build that digestive fire, help give yourself that energy and passion, and find ways to bring that balance. And so understanding that's what we should do. I'm having the realization as we're having this podcast is we should think about it instead of masculine and feminine energies. We should be thinking about it in the elements and how we're producing those elements in our emotions and the ways around us, how they work together and how they balance each other out over time. Because as humans, we are constantly changing. Our needs change. Our bodies' needs change as we get older. And so understanding how these elements show up in our emotions, in our physical body, in our spiritual body, and the ways that we can use them to go back and forth, and what balance looks like to us isn't equal of all of the elements, but the combination of the elements that we need in that moment, if that makes sense. I'd love to hear what you think about this. So definitely leave a comment below or go hit me up on social media. I definitely would love to have more conversations about this. Or if you want to hop on a podcast with me and chat about it and we can go back and forth, I'd love that too. I appreciate you joining me today for this exploration into the power of language and the way gender impacts our mind. And I like to end my podcasts in some affirmations. So I just want to remind you that you're doing enough. You're worthy. You're valid. Your existence is radiant. And I'm so grateful that you're here. This concludes another episode of our Weaving Magick podcast.
We release one episode a week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the latest episode as soon as it releases. You can find us on Instagram at Weaving Magick Podcast. That's Weaving Magick, Magick Podcast.
We would also love it if you could leave us a review. If you do, make sure to email us your review so we can send you a thank you gift. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to find a way to weave magic into your daily life.